Gary, Indiana, today. A car rolled slowly down Carolina Street. On either side of the road, abandoned houses, windows sealed with plywood, yards swallowed by weeds, cracked sidewalks where nobody walked anymore. Gary had been a prosperous city once, the steel capital of America. In the 60s, it had thrived. Then the mills closed, the people left, and the city slowly emptied itself of its substance, like a body left behind. The car stopped in front of number 3860. There was nothing there, a vacant lot, tall grass, weeds, and a single tree still standing, rising exactly where the front of a house used to be. No plaque, no memorial, no fence. Nothing to suggest that this patch of dirt had once appeared in newspapers around the world. And yet, at night, people came here. Curiosity seekers, ghost hunters, teenagers armed with candles and spirit boards. The Gary police had to chase them off again and again. Father Maginot, the priest who had tried to save the family that lived here, had given a warning. Curiosity, he said, is an invitation. Because there had been a house here, a small single-story bungalow, 3 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, 1 bathroom, a screened-in porch, and a concrete basement you reach by a narrow staircase off the kitchen. Between November 2011 and May 2012, that house became the stage for what many consider the most documented demonic possession case in American history. Not documented by a book, not by a movie, by official reports, nearly 800 pages of them. Statements from police officers, nurses, social workers, a physician, and a Catholic priest. Some of them saw things they could not explain. Others believed the whole thing was staged. This is the story of 3860 Carolina Street, the demon house of Gary, Indiana. November 2011. Latoya Ammons parked her car in front of the little bungalow on Carolina Street and looked at the facade. Nothing remarkable. Peeling paint, a screened porch with 1 cracked pane, a narrow yard facing the street, a modest house in a modest neighborhood, in a city that had seen better days. But it was all she could afford. Latoya was a single mother, 3 children, a 12-year-old daughter and 2 boys, 9 and 7. She lived with her mother, Rosa Campbell, who worked as a caregiver at a nearby nursing home. 5 people for 3 bedrooms, 1 living room, 1 bathroom. It was tight, but it was a roof. The house belonged to Charles Reed, a Gary landlord who had been renting out properties for over 30 years. Several families had lived there before the Ammonses. None of them had ever reported anything unusual. The first days passed normally. The children settled into their rooms. Rosa organized the kitchen. Latoya hung curtains in the windows. Ordinary life resumed its course, in an ordinary house, in an ordinary city. At least, that's what they believed. December 2011. Winter had settled over Gary. Temperatures had dropped well below freezing. The icy Indiana wind cut between the houses, locking the city in a white silence. One morning, Rosa Campbell opened the door to the screened porch and stopped cold. Flies. Dozens of fat black flies, clustered on the windows, on the screens, on the porch ceiling, in the middle of winter, with the thermometer reading below 0 outside. Rosa could feel their buzzing vibrate in her chest, a heavy oppressive sound, like a generator running too hard. She took a rag and crushed them, gathered the bodies, wiped the glass. The next morning, they were back, just as many, just as fat, just as black. Rosa cleaned again. They came back again. We kept killing them and killing them and killing them, she would later say, and they kept coming back. It was only flies, a strange, stubborn insect problem. Nothing to panic about, not yet. Then the nights changed. Past midnight, when the house was dark and the children were asleep, Rosa and Latoya began to hear sounds, footsteps, heavy, regular, climbing the basement stairs, step after step, slowly. The wood creaking under a weight they could not see. The door between the basement and the kitchen would groan and swing open. Latoya would get up and turn on the light. The kitchen sat in the yellow glow of the fluorescent tube. No one. The basement was empty. The kitchen was empty. Silence. And yet the footsteps had been clear, distinct, as if someone heavy were climbing the stairs. They locked the basement door, pushed a chair against it. The sounds continued anyway, night after night, the footsteps, the creak, the opening door. One night, Rosa jolted awake in the living room. A few feet from her bed, a figure was standing, tall, dark, a man, or the shape of a man. It paced from one wall to the other without a sound. Rosa felt the air turn colder around her, as if the temperature of the room had plunged 10 degrees at once. She tried to scream. No sound came out. Her throat was knotted, squeezed, as if an invisible hand were compressing it from the inside. She reached for the light switch, flicked it on. No one. The living room was empty. But on the floor, exactly where the figure had walked, wet boot prints gleamed in the light, sharp, fresh, as if someone had just come in from the rain. A few nights later, Rosa woke up with pressure around her throat. Not a vague sensation, fingers. She could feel fingers, their warmth and their grip against her skin, against her arteries, against her larynx. She couldn't breathe. Her vision blurred. She flailed her arms in the dark, hit the mattress, tried to claw at whatever was holding her. Her nails found only air. Then, as brutally as it had come, the pressure vanished. Rosa sat in the dark, gasping, her trembling hands around her own neck. Something was living in that house with them, and that something did not want them there. The children were next. It began subtly. Absent stares at the dinner table, a spoon frozen above a plate, eyes fixed on a point no one else could see. Unusual silences. The 12-year-old refused to sleep alone. The 9-year-old started lashing out for no reason. One day, he headbutted his grandmother so violently he split her lip. The 7-year-old murmured phrases no one in the family had ever taught him. The episodes grew sharper. The children's eyes would roll back, showing only white. Their voices changed, dropping an octave, then 2, becoming guttural, hoarse, adult. Voices that could not come from a child's body. And across their faces, a smile would spread, wide, fixed. A grin Latoya did not recognize. A smile that belonged to no one she loved. The 9-year-old described what it felt like to be killed. The 7-year-old, his child's voice turning deep and cavernous, murmured, "It's time to die." The night of March 10th, 2 a.m. The 12-year-old's scream tore through the silence like a blade. Latoya and Rosa rushed to her room. Latoya pushed the door open, hit the light, and froze. The girl was above her bed, not sitting, not standing, above it. Suspended in the air, unconscious, her body rigid, arms at her sides, motionless, floating. Rosa collapsed to her knees. Her lips began to move before she even realized she was praying. Latoya prayed with her, words tumbling out of her mouth, fragments of psalms tangled with pleading, anything, everything that came. The prayers went on for long minutes. The girl's body, suspended above the mattress, did not move. Then slowly, it came back down, settled onto the bed. Her eyes opened. She looked around, disoriented. She remembered nothing. The family friends who had agreed to spend the night left the house before dawn. They would refuse to ever set foot in it again. Latoya knew she needed help, the kind of help medicine could not provide. She contacted local churches, called pastors, left messages. Most never called back. The ones who didn't take her seriously. A woman claiming her children were levitating. It sounded like madness, not a pastoral emergency. One church agreed to listen. They advised her to clean the house with bleach and ammonia, and to draw crosses in holy oil on every door and every window. Latoya obeyed. Nothing changed. She turned to 2 local clairvoyants. They agreed to come. The 2 women walked the house room by room, the living room, the bedrooms, the kitchen, the basement. They took their time. They listened. They observed. Their verdict chilled Latoya's blood. More than 200 demons inhabited this house. The clairvoyants told her to leave immediately. Take her children, take her mother, and never come back. But Latoya didn't have the means to move. No savings. No family with a home big enough. Nowhere to go. So the clairvoyants taught her a protection ritual. Latoya was to dress entirely in white, wrap a cloth around her head, light a bundle of sage and sulfur, and walk through every room reciting Psalm 91. You shall not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that walks in darkness, nor the destruction that strikes at noon. They told her to build an altar in the basement, a sacred rampart against whatever lived below. Latoya obeyed. She set up a small table in the center of the basement, covered it with a white cloth, placed on it a white candle, a statuette of the Holy Family, and a Bible open to Psalm 91. She poured circles of salt along the walls. The sage burned. The sulfur released its acrid smell. The words of the psalm echoed through the house. Calm returned. The noises stopped. The children slept. Rosa saw no more figures. For 3 days, the house was silent. 3 days. Exactly. On the 4th, everything started again. The footsteps on the stairs, the doors opening, the children's deep voices, more intense now, more aggressive, as if the ritual had done nothing but enrage whatever lived in that house. The children began sleeping together in the same room. Whoever remained alone in a room started avoiding it. In April 2012, Latoya Ammons brought her children to Dr. Jeffrey Onyukwu, their family physician. Dr. Onyukwu was an experienced practitioner, 20 years of medical work behind him. He examined the children one by one, noted their strange behavior, their abnormally deep voices, the disturbing statements they made. In their medical file, he wrote 2 clinical notes: delusions of ghosts in the home and hallucinations. But privately, he would later tell the Indianapolis Star a very different version. 20 years, and I've never heard anything like that in my life. I was scared myself, walking into that room. During the consultation, according to the official Department of Child Services report, the 7-year-old boy was flung through the air and slammed into a wall. No one had touched him. No one was standing close enough to push him. Dr. Onyukwu immediately alerted DCS, Indiana's Child Protection Services. A social worker named Valerie Washington was sent to the hospital to assess the situation. Washington arrived expecting a classic case of parental neglect. A fragile mother, disturbed children, nothing supernatural. While she was interviewing Latoya, the 7-year-old began to growl. His eyes rolled back, showing only white, his jaw clenched, and in a voice that had nothing of a 7-year-old in it, deep, hoarse, cavernous, he said, "It's time to die. I will kill you." Washington did not move. She noted what she saw and continued her assessment. That evening, she returned with a nurse named Willie Lee Walker to examine the 2 boys. She was in an exam room with the 9-year-old when something happened that Valerie Washington would document in her official report. The boy wore a strange grin, a smile that wasn't really one. His eyes were empty, glassy, as if covered in a milky film. Rosa Campbell was holding his hands. Then the child's body began to move. He slid backward. His feet left the floor. He went up the wall, backward, as if gravity had simply stopped applying to him. He passed over his grandmother's head and came down on the other side. Nurse Willie Walker ran out of the room. Valerie Washington stayed. She wrote down everything. It is this precise incident that would divide the world, because there was another version. According to skeptical investigator Joe Nickel of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, Rosa Campbell was holding the child's hands at the moment of the incident, not restraining him, but supporting him. What Washington interpreted as a walk up the wall was, in this reading, a child whose grandmother was physically helping him climb, pulling him by the arms. No levitation, no defiance of gravity, just a grandmother and a boy, in a room thick with fear and expectation. But Washington, a trained professional, used to spotting manipulation, judged the event troubling enough to record it, in black and white, in an official state report. In April 2012, the Department of Child Services removed all 3 children from Latoya Ammons. Not for paranormal reasons. DCS does not write demonic possession in its files. The official grounds were the children's spiritual and emotional distress. An anonymous report had been filed claiming Latoya suffered from mental illness and that the children were acting out behaviors their mother encouraged. Latoya was submitted to a full psychiatric evaluation. The result was unambiguous. She was declared perfectly sane. The children were placed anyway. Of the entire affair, this was the most painful moment. Not the flies, not the footsteps on the stairs, not the figure in the living room or the levitation above the bed. 3 children taken from their mother, 3 children crying, a mother watching them go. We had fought so hard together, Latoya would tell the Indianapolis Star. We were a team, we were winning together, and they separated us. Latoya Ammons found herself alone with her mother, in a house she no longer dared to live in, stripped of her children by an administration that didn't know whether to protect her or to watch her. But the day after the children were removed, a phone call changed the course of events. A hospital chaplain, a witness to what had happened in that exam room, contacted a priest from a nearby parish, and he asked him for something no one had ever asked him in his entire priesthood: an exorcism. Merrillville, Indiana, a few miles south of Gary. St. Stephen Martyr Parish was a modern church tucked into a quiet residential suburb. Its pastor was Father Michael Maginot. Maginot was not an exorcist. He had no specific training in the field. He had never faced a case of possession. He was an ordinary parish priest. He said Sunday Mass, baptized newborns, visited the sick. But when he heard about the Ammons family, something pushed him to act. 3 days after the children were removed, April 22, 2012, he drove to 3860 Carolina Street. He stayed 4 hours. Maginot sat at the kitchen table with Latoya and Rosa. He listened patiently, without interrupting. He asked precise questions, noted dates, events, details. During the interview, the kitchen lights flickered repeatedly. The fluorescent tube above the table stuttered, threw trembling shadows across the walls, stabilized, then started again. Maginot glanced up at the ceiling, took mental note, and continued his questions. An oily, transparent liquid was seeping from the blinds of one window. Maginot approached, touched it with his fingertips, greasy, odorless. He wiped it away with a cloth. A few minutes later, the liquid was back, in exactly the same spot. He wiped it again. It came back again. He went down to the basement. Something drew him toward the space under the stairs. Not intellectual curiosity, a physical sensation, a pressure on his chest that intensified as he approached the patch of loose dirt. The air grew denser with every step, as if he were wading through water. Maginot stopped in front of the broken floor, the concrete torn open, the bare earth beneath. He stood there, motionless, eyes closed, listening to something no one else could hear. He became convinced that occult rituals had been performed here, not by the Ammonses, by someone else, before them, and that those rituals had opened something. His conclusion left no room for doubt. This family was being tormented by demons. Before leaving, Maginot blessed the house. He prayed in every room, sprinkled holy water into every corner, read passages of scripture. Then he turned to Latoya and Rosa. "Leave," he told them. "This house is not safe." A few days later, Latoya and Rosa fled 3860 Carolina Street for good. They found refuge with a relative in Indianapolis, leaving the house empty, abandoned to itself. But the authorities were not done with 3860 Carolina Street. DCS asked the police to inspect the house, to evaluate the environment the children had lived in, to understand what could have triggered their behavior. The group that gathered in front of the bungalow was an unlikely one. Captain Charles Austin of the Gary Police, 36 years on the force, a veteran who had seen it all. Officers from Hammond and Gary, drawn by professional curiosity. Valerie Washington, the social worker who had watched a boy walk up a wall. And Rosa Campbell, the only member of the family willing to come back. Latoya refused to cross the threshold. She stayed outside on the sidewalk, arms crossed, eyes locked on the front door. On the main floor, nothing spectacular. 3 bedrooms with worn floors, a narrow living room, a bathroom, an open kitchen, and everywhere, Bibles. Improvised altars in several rooms, crosses of oil on the door frames. The whole house smelled of burnt sage and sulfur. The group went down to the basement, a narrow staircase, raw concrete walls. The air was heavier down there, colder, thicker, the kind of cold that didn't come from outside, that seemed to seep out of the walls themselves. The basement floor was concrete, except under the stairs. There the concrete had been torn up, broken, in its place, loose dirt, as if someone had been digging, or as if something had been buried there, long before the Ammonses arrived. Latoya's altar was still standing, the white cloth, the melted candle, the statuette of the Holy Family, the Bible open to Psalm 91, and along the walls, the circles of salt. The officers noted their radios malfunctioning, bursts of static that appeared without cause, and vanished as soon as they climbed back upstairs. One officer had left his recorder running. Listening back, he found a faint whisper, barely audible. One word, just one. "Hey." Photos taken that day showed unexplained shapes. One of them, later published by the Indianapolis Star, seemed to show a silhouette in the window of the house when the interior had been checked and no one was inside. Captain Charles Austin had arrived expecting a hoax. He had assumed at first that Latoya was trying to make money. He left transformed. "I'm a believer now," he would say. 36 years of police work. I've seen a lot of things, but I'd never seen anything like this. Coming home that night, Austin found his garage door refusing to open, and the seat of his car began to move on its own, without him touching the controls. Back at his parish, Father Maginot wrote a detailed report. Every phenomenon observed, every testimony gathered, every anomaly recorded. He sent the document to Bishop Dale Melchick, head of the Diocese of Gary, along with a formal request, authorization to perform a major exorcism on Latoya Ammons. The answer was no. Bishop Melchick had never authorized a single exorcism in 21 years at the head of the diocese. The Catholic Church treats such requests with extreme caution. A major exorcism is not a trivial act. It is a rare, tightly regulated ritual, requiring the explicit approval of a bishop. Melchick advised Maginot to contact priests experienced in such cases to train, not to rush. Maginot reached out to colleagues. None could, or would, help him directly. Some suggested he look up the rite of minor exorcism online. The minor exorcism, a lighter rite requiring no episcopal approval, prayers, injunctions, appeals to divine power to drive back evil. Less powerful than a major exorcism, but accessible without authorization. Maginot found the ritual online. He prepared it, and he went back to Latoya. The minor exorcism took place in the presence of 2 police officers and Samantha Illich, a DCS caseworker. Valerie Washington, the one who had seen the child walk up the wall, was not there. Her report had seemed so unhinged to her superiors that Illich had been sent to verify the facts. She was the rational safeguard, the one who was supposed to prove there were no ghosts. Maginot prayed, recited the formulas, addressed directly what he believed to be demonic entities. For nearly 2 hours his voice filled the room, alternating between supplication to God and commands to the demons. Latoya sat facing him, eyes closed, body tense. Samantha Illich watched in silence. She was not a believer. She hadn't come for demons. She had come for the children. But what she felt in that room marked her deeply. "It felt like there was someone in the room with us," she would tell the Indianapolis Star. "Someone breathing down your neck." The minor exorcism did not end the phenomena. It seemed to dull them, temporarily, a reprieve, not a cure. In the weeks that followed her last visit to Carolina Street, Samantha Illich suffered a series of accidents that bad luck alone struggled to explain. A week after her visit, she sustained third-degree burns in a motorcycle accident. Within 30 days, she broke 3 ribs jet skiing, broke her hand hitting a table, then shattered her ankle while running. "I had friends who wouldn't talk to me anymore," she would recount, "because they believed something had attached itself to me." Then something shifted on the bishop's side. Maybe it was Maginot's report. Maybe the testimonies of the police and DCS. Maybe the hundreds of pages of documentation piling up on his desk. Bishop Melchick, for the first time in 21 years of episcopal ministry, gave his authorization. Father Michael Maginot was going to perform a major exorcism. June 2012. 3 exorcisms were performed on Latoya Ammons, not in the Carolina Street house, first at the church, then at the family's new home in Indianapolis. The first was in English. Maginot followed the classic ritual: prayers, psalms, direct injunctions ordering the demon to leave Latoya's body and mind. He watched her reactions. During the condemnations, when he addressed the demon, Latoya convulsed. Her body stiffened. Her hands gripped the armrests of the chair, her knuckles turning white under the pressure. But during the prayers, when Maginot addressed God, she remained calm, almost serene, as if two forces were fighting over the same body. The second exorcism was also in English, longer, more intense. This time, Maginot tried to name the demons. In the Catholic tradition of exorcism, a name holds power. To name a demon is to hold authority over it, to force it out of the shadows. Latoya had tried to research the demons' identities online. Her computer shut down every time she got close to an answer. She would start again. It would shut down again. As if something did not want her to find those names. She finally succeeded. The names were passed to Maginot. The third exorcism was in Latin. The ancient rite, the Rituale Romanum. The words the church had used for centuries to fight evil. The same words, in the same language, spoken by thousands of priests before him, in dark rooms over suffering bodies. Maginot pressed a crucifix to Latoya's forehead. She convulsed violently, her whole body arched. The pain, she would later say, was as intense as giving birth. A scream escaped her, then another. Her hands searched for something to grip. Her feet scraped the floor, her back bowed. Maginot did not stop. He carried the ritual through, word after word, verse after verse. At the end, an assistant wrote the demon's name on a sheet of paper. The paper was burned. Salt was laid down as a barrier. Latoya fell asleep. When she woke, she felt different, light, clear, as if a weight that had been pressing on her chest for months had just been lifted. It was over. The phenomena stopped. Completely. Permanently. In November, the children were returned to their mother. The family was reunited, far from Gary, far from Carolina Street, far from the basement. No more demonic presence or spirits in the home, wrote Christina Olejnik, the caseworker who followed the family in the months that followed. The family no longer fixates on religion to explain or manage the children's behavioral issues. January 2014. The Indianapolis Star published journalist Marisa Kwiatkowski's investigation into the Ammons case. The article detailed the 800 pages of official documentation, the testimonies of the police, the DCS, the doctor, the priest. It was all there, in black and white, reports, photos, depositions. It went around the country within hours. In Las Vegas, a man read the article on his phone. Zach Bagans, 40 years old, host and executive producer of Ghost Adventures, one of the most popular paranormal shows on American television. He had investigated hundreds of supposedly haunted locations around the world. Bagans called the owner of the house, and he bought 3,860 Carolina Street on the spot, over the phone, for $35,000, without ever having set foot in Gary, without ever having seen the house. In 2015, Bagans and a small crew moved in for 3 weeks of filming. The production became a nightmare. Cameras failed at key moments. Audio equipment crackled without cause. Batteries drained in minutes, as if sucked dry from the inside. But that wasn't the worst of it. The people changed. One crew member became suddenly aggressive, violent, behavior no one had ever seen in him. Bagans had to fire him. Another walked off the shoot overnight and refused to return. Several fell ill, sudden, unexplained sicknesses that pinned them to their beds for days. Bagans himself reported episodes of sudden rage, fits of violence he could not control, recurring nightmares, a deep exhaustion that drained him. On the final night, Bagans asked to be locked inside the house, alone, barricaded, boards nailed over the doors and windows. He wanted to face whatever was in there. What happened inside that night, only his cameras know. The next day, his eyes crossed. His vision doubled. The world went blurry, unstable, as if seen through warped glass. The diagnosis, diplopia, permanent double vision, 4 doctors, MRI, CT scan, blood tests, a full neurological workup. Every result came back normal. Not one of the 4 could explain the sudden onset of the disorder in an otherwise healthy man. He would wear prism glasses for the rest of his life. Bagans installed surveillance cameras in the house for 2.5 years, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Not once did a single camera film an object moving on its own. Bagans saw it as a sign of intelligence. The entity knew it was being filmed. It refused to show itself. It preferred to act on people, not on objects. A skeptic would see something else entirely, the absence of proof. In January 2016, Bagans had the house demolished. The bulldozers arrived on a cold January morning. Within hours, the Carolina Street bungalow no longer existed. All that remained was the bare lot, the churned earth, and the tree in front, the last witness still standing. The decision was controversial. Father Maginot publicly opposed it. By keeping the house and locking it down, he could have protected people, the priest declared. Now that it's an empty lot, people come to hold seances, and the police have to chase them away. Those people are in great danger, and all it takes is curiosity. Curiosity is an invitation. Bagans salvaged pieces of the house before the demolition. The basement staircase, the one the family called the stairway to hell, dirt from under the steps, the ritual objects. Everything was shipped to Bagans' Haunted Museum in Las Vegas. His documentary, Demon House, was released in March 2018. Critics were divided. Years after the demolition, Bagans admitted the house had never really left him. To this day, I still get visions in my head, the house, its smell, little things that remind me it hasn't forgotten me. And then, in a confession that chilled the blood, in some sick, weird way, I miss the house. Not everyone believed in the demon house. Joe Nickel, veteran investigator for the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, traveled to Gary, Indiana to conduct his own investigation. His approach had nothing supernatural about it. He was looking for facts, inconsistencies, rational explanations, and he found them. The landlord, Charles Reed, was categorical. In decades of managing rental properties, he had never had a single problem with that house. The previous tenants had reported nothing. The tenant who moved in after the Ammonses left noticed nothing either. No ghosts, no sounds, no flies. Reed had his own theory. Latoya Ammons was behind on her rent. She had used the so-called paranormal phenomena to avoid paying it. The court-appointed psychologists who evaluated the children corroborated that reading, and above all, they had observed something the believers preferred not to mention. Once removed from their mother and placed in foster care, the children's abnormal behavior stopped entirely. No more deep voices, no more rolling eyes, no more grins, no more levitation, no more walking up walls, nothing. From one day to the next, 3 children supposedly possessed by demons had become 3 ordinary children again. Stacy Wright, a clinical psychologist, evaluated the youngest boy over several weeks. Her report was unequivocal. The child was perfectly sane, lucid, cooperative. He showed no sign of psychosis or thought disorder, except when the subject of demons came up. There, and only there, he behaved as if possessed. Every time he was challenged or asked questions he didn't want to answer. His accounts of the possession were, in Wright's words, bizarre, fragmented, and illogical, and they changed every time he told them. A child who invents, not a child who remembers. Wright summed up the case in one sentence. This appears to be an unfortunate and sad case of a child who has been induced into a delusional system perpetuated by his mother. Joel Schwartz, who evaluated the 2 older children, reached the same conclusion. The children were acting deceptively, in alignment with their mother's beliefs. They, too, showed no symptoms whatsoever in Latoya's absence. For the skeptics, the demonstration was airtight. If demons had truly possessed these children, why did they evaporate the day DCS separated them from their mother? Why was not a single episode, not a single voice, not a single crisis ever reported in the foster homes? Did demons respect the administrative decisions of the state of Indiana? The believers read it differently. The children had been taken away from the house, away from 3860 Carolina Street, from the basement, from the loose dirt under the stairs, from what Father Maginot called a portal. If the source of the evil was the house itself, it was only logical that the children found peace by leaving it. 2 interpretations, the same facts, and no proof to settle it. Nickel pointed to other cracks. Captain Austin, presented as a converted skeptic, was, by his own admission, a committed believer in the supernatural, ghosts included, long before he ever set foot in the house. Not the neutral, objective witness the story needed, the photo of the silhouette in the window. The Hammond police chief confirmed it had not been taken by his department, contrary to what the published legend claimed. Its origin remained unknown. And the house itself. An inspection revealed mold in the walls. Certain molds, stachybotrys among them, can cause neurological symptoms, headaches, mental confusion, hallucinations, anxiety, cognitive disturbance. Black flies proliferating in a moldy environment, even in winter, biologically plausible. Footsteps in an old basement of cracking concrete, structurally banal. Children imitating their mother's beliefs and acting possessed when it suited them, psychologically documented. For Nickel, there was no mystery at 3860 Carolina Street. There was a vulnerable family, intense religious belief, an unhealthy environment, and a snowball effect in which every witness already convinced or influenced by the ones before interpreted ordinary events through the lens of the supernatural. Years later, the demon house of Gary, Indiana remains a case impossible to close. On one side, facts that troubled official witnesses, police officers from 3 different jurisdictions, nurses, social workers who saw things they could not explain, nearly 800 pages of administrative documentation, a Catholic priest who obtained authorization for an exorcism, the first in 21 years, from a bishop not known for his credulity, a paranormal investigator who left with his vision permanently, medically inexplicably damaged. On the other, the absence of any physical proof. 2.5 years of surveillance cameras without a single object moving on frame. Psychologists who saw children manipulated by a struggling mother. A landlord who never had a problem with the house. A next tenant who noticed nothing. A mother behind on her rent. Mold in the walls. 2 readings of the same events. 2 parallel truths. And nothing. No proof, no testimony, no document. To settle the matter once and for all. Latoya Ammons lives in Indianapolis with her children, in peace. No phenomena since they left Gary. The children have never been interviewed publicly. Latoya protected them. Their names never appeared in the press. She has one message for those who doubt her story. When you hear something like this, don't assume it isn't real, because I lived it. I know it's real. Father Maginot continues his ministry in Merrillville. He still regrets the demolition of the house. He believes it could have been locked, watched, the curious kept away. Zach Baggins wears his prism glasses. His vision never returned to normal. And at 3860 Carolina Street, Gary, Indiana, nothing remains. A vacant lot, grass, a solitary tree whose branches, some visitors say, form a vaguely human silhouette when the wind blows. The house no longer exists, but the question it left behind has never been answered. What lived at 3860 Carolina Street between November 2011 and May 2012? Demons, as the clairvoyant said, an evil presence, as the priest believed, or simply fear, mold, and misery, as the skeptics maintain. No one knows. And on the empty lot of Carolina Street, in the silence of a slowly dying city, the tree keeps watch. Sole witness, last remnant, silent sentinel of a story no one has ever been able to explain.